Yes, more people coming in. It's lovely to see you all. And for everyone who's joining us on Facebook or YouTube, welcome as well. We're glad that you can be here in some way to study with us. We're going to be moving into one of the most dramatic Torah portions that we have, which is Kichitza, the story of the golden calf. We're not going to be focused as much on that as to the reaction to the golden calf today. But before we dive in, let us offer our blessing. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah Hafok ba, lasok b'divrei Torah. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Welcome to everyone who just joined us. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm going to share my screen so we look at the text for today. Okay, I will momentarily. Things moved around on me as they sometimes do. Okay, there we go. Hi, Tom. Welcome. Okay, so it's a little bit of an echo. I'm not sure why. I just want to invite you to go on mute. And then as you want to say something, by all means, unmute and jump into the conversation. Today we're focusing on the midah around anger, or the soul trait having to do with anger. And this Torah portion, Kichitza, and before we can truly dive into it, we begin by reading this text. Make it a little bigger. Does that work? Can everyone see this okay? Would anyone like to read just the first few verses of this text as much as you'd like to read? Any takers? Okay, we're all a little quiet today. That's fine. Rabbi Catherine, did you? Sorry, I saw a couple hands. I saw Rabbi Catherine and I saw Ray.
Take Ray.
Okay, thank you, Ray.
And the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain. The people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that fellow Moses, the man who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." Aaron said to them, "You men, take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of," I don't know how to read
Of Adonai, of God.
Oh, right, there you go. I can't even see straight. Early next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink. Okay.
Do you want to stop there, Rabbi Catherine? Will you pick up? Here, I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. I know this is a long text. So we're right in the middle of here. They sat down to eat and drink.
We're at 7. Adonai spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" Adonai further said to Moses, "I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation.
Okay, so there is so much in this text. Thank you so much, Ray. Thank you so much, Rabbi Catherine, for reading. We know there is a ton within these 10 verses that's going on here, right? Our focal point today is really on this final verse, where God responds after seeing the people creating this golden calf, and God responds by saying, now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against him and I may destroy the Jewish people, right? And so I just want to start with this basic question of, is God's anger justified here?
It's like having read ahead in the text so much, it's like hard to answer that question.
Yes, right. Reading the Musar commentary or reading some of the commentaries that I brought in. Exactly. What does anyone think? Like, what is your gut reaction reading this text? The Jewish people clearly made a mistake creating this golden calf, right? Worshiping it. But God's response here, that let my anger blaze forth so I might destroy them. What is your response to that comment by God?
As a human being, my response would be, well, then why did you take us out? You're going to turn around and kill us?
So your reactions are so quick. Why are you allowing yourself to respond so quickly? Yeah, go ahead.
My feeling is that there's a love relationship between God and his people, and they turned on him. And I think that, and they were kind of quick to do that. And I think that his response was one of emotion. And I think that's the beautiful part about this, is that he's just really upset that they would do that. And I think it's like any of ours knee-jerk reactions to being hurt and betrayed. So that's how I feel about that.
So we see ourselves in God here.
Kind of do. Yeah, in that way. Yeah. Little projection.
I'm noticing that God left himself an out. Now let me be. Like right now I'm involved with y'all and I'm really annoyed, but there is that. So what if we don't let God be? Or Moses let God be, and that's directed to Moses.
Yeah.
I have a problem with this text because this is not the God that I believe in.
So say more about that.
I don't see God as being this quick to anger, quick to judgment. There's no message of teshuvah, of giving the ability for the people who've made the mistake to repent. It just seems out of place for what we've studied about God and what we've seen so far about God in the Torah until we get here. If I remember correctly, this is the first time that God has been really vengeful.
There are a couple of things that happened before this where God's anger was definitely displayed, right? Like there was the moment where after the people left Egypt and they're being given manna and they say, we just want to eat meat. And God responds by saying, I'll give you so much meat, it's coming out of your nostrils, right? Like there's this like, you want meat, I'll give you meat. There is some anger in that, to be sure, but this is definitely a different kind of level.
I was thinking that, remember how we've been taught that there's a spark of the divine in each of us? Well, maybe it's not always the positive divine, because I'm thinking back on times when I said, oh, I'm so angry, I could kill that guy. Well, I would never do that. Of course, I would never say it, but in my head, I'm saying, oh, I could just kill him. And then I look at parents who say, you know, I'm so disappointed in your decision to break curfew. I can't talk to you right now. I will discuss this with you in the morning. They take that time to pull back, kind of like how God did there. I need to take a step back because then the real issue becomes my anger and not the fact that you broke curfew, didn't make her, you know what I mean? That's what I'm thinking.
So is the anger a problem then? Like, I'm wondering if there's a differentiation here, right? Like, you broke curfew. I'm really disappointed. I'm upset with you for that. Is that feeling a problem? Or is it about the way in which we respond to that feeling that could be problematic?
Well, I think if you were a parent, to answer your question to that specific, I think it's problematic. I don't think it's a problem. I think from that, there will be a parent-child discussion and a consequence for, not coming home on time. I think a good will come out of that because I believe people have the intention to make the family function and work right. So in this case with God, I think that's what happens, is that I don't see it as a problem, but I do see it as problematic, if that makes any sense, that differentiation for me. And then
Yes.
from that, you make changes. You don't kill your kid, but the anger's there. I get it. You don't kill them because that's what you were worried about anyway when they broke curfew, that something bad happened.
Yeah.
Maybe God's, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Maybe God's bark is bigger than actually his actions. And, he threatens to destroy. Obviously he didn't, I think Moses pleads with him and so forth. I don't know. I don't want to say that it seems like God is human because I don't, you know what I mean? There's that aspect of it. He's showing these strong emotions. Is he justified? He's trying to make a very important point, to the Israelites who were so unruly, and so he's making a point. So I can understand that these are the values that are really, really important in Judaism, and so I understand in part, yes, as long as he doesn't take the action, I think it's okay. He's justified.
Well, to push this a little bit further, I keep looking at this verse 10. It's like, so God says to Moses, Moses is the parent in this situation, to use Marla's way of looking at it. It's like, I see that these people are stiff-necked. It's like, this is really not a surprise. However, you have to realize how frightened we also are. A lot of times when you rebel, there's fright behind it, and there certainly is here. And he says, let me be, leave me alone. Moses, leave me alone. So he's offering an out, but he's also offering an in. Let me be, that my anger may blaze forth. If you look at it, then if Moses doesn't walk away and say, okay, God, go ahead, which he does not do, but there is this, let me be that my anger may blaze forth. Moses doesn't let him be. He could have done that. He could have said, I've had it, but he doesn't do that. And God leaves that possibility. He's not wiping everybody out, and he is leaving the person that can mediate it, as it were. And God, he could just be, if God says, no, I'm not going to leave you alone and let you be angry, right there, he's provided the overnight in which the parent decides what they're going to do.
So I want us to hold on to that, because that's exactly where our other interpretation of this text is going to lead us to. I want us just to put a pin in that, because it's so, so important. We're going to get back to everything that you just were talking about, Rabbi Catherine. And before we dive into that very, very important conversation, I want to just look at a couple of different texts that talk about anger within our tradition to see kind of what our responses are to these texts. Would anyone like to read this piece by Maimonides? Thank you, Sari.
Okay, there are certain, there are certain tendencies which man is forbidden to follow in the middle way, but must distance himself from extreme to extreme. One should teach himself not to get angry, even over a matter which befits anger. If one desires to engender awe in his children and his household or in the public, if he be at the head of community, even if he desire to get angry at them so as to bring them back to the good way, he should only act angry in their presence so as to reprove them, but this disposition must remain calm within himself, even as a man imitates who is angry when the time calls forth anger, but in reality, he is not angry. The sages of yore said, he who yields to anger is as if he worshiped idolatry. They also said, whoever yields to anger, if he be a wise man, his wisdom leaves him. And if he be a prophet, his prophecy leaves him.
Okay, so what is Maimonides really trying to teach with these words?
Try not to get angry or not to show it.
You can also teach a lot more by maintaining your calmness. So you can feel angry inside, but you don't have to project it. You can be upset and feel that something is really important. But I think a lot of time people shut down when you're angry at them, when you yell at them. So maybe to remain calm while you're trying to, to teach them something of value.
Yeah, Michael, did you have more that you wanted to say there?
Oh,
I don't know if you're frozen.
No, I'm not frozen, but I guess at times
Michael, there's a problem with your internet. We're having trouble.
Oh, really? All right.
You're breaking.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
A little bit.
I'll try to fix this.
Yeah, sorry. It's really, really hard to hear you. If you want to type into the chat, we'll be happy to read that out, and hopefully the internet will make itself better magically.
Can you hear me now at all or not really?
Yes.
Better? Okay. A little bit better?
It's not consistent. Yeah, now we're having trouble again. If you want to type into the chat, we'd love to be able to learn from you. That might be a better way of doing it right now. Sorry, I know it's frustrating.
So in a way, this is the opposite of what I would think, if I'm not misinterpreting it. It's not to feel the anger inside, but it's okay to act angry for whatever reason that may bring it to a positive outcome. Is that what they're saying here?
Yeah, Maimonides is saying anger is never okay. Don't allow yourself ever to feel anger. It doesn't help you. And we'll see kind of how we feel about that. I want to go through just a couple of these texts. They're all a little different from one another, and then to be able to reflect on them as a whole. But let's hold on to this little piece of Maimonides as we think through it. One other text we have, and this is on a similar idea of associating anger with idolatry. Alan Marinus, of course, who wrote in his book, Everyday Holiness. This association of anger with idolatry also reveals why anger is such a frightful power. When a person loses his or her temper, he or she becomes overwhelmed and overpowered by the emotion of anger. By allowing that to happen, a person yields authority over to their life to a raging emotion. And it is then the power of anger, rather than God, that the angry person serves. So this is a very different idea than what Maimonides is saying, right? Maimonides is saying, don't feel anger. Even if you need to pretend to feel anger to get your point across, don't actually feel it, right? Whereas Alan Marinus is saying, don't let your anger overcome you. Don't serve your anger. Serve your greater purpose. And then when we go a little bit further, there's a couple of similar but slightly different ideas. Orchot Tzadikim says anger causes a person to be stubborn. This goes back to what I think Marla said a little while ago. And because of his anger, a person will not make concessions and he will not admit the truth. People who are angry, who reinforce their rage, are unaware of what they do, and they do many things in their anger that they would not do when calm. For anger causes one to think irrationally and to speak out of anger, thus triggering disputes and quarrels. So we can see a connection between this text and what Alan Marinis was teaching, but it's giving the other nuance of creating kind of an inability to listen to others when we're coming at a place of anger, right? And then finally, the last text to bring in here is from Rabbi Mary Chernow, who said, once anger leads to a regrettable action, we can no longer speak of one injured party and one injuring party. Anger has the potential to make it impossible to claim that one is holding a righteous high ground. It ensures that both parties will bear responsibilities for a damaged relationship. In this case, if God had given into rage, there would be little difference between God and the brazen Israelites. Both sides would be, as it were, idol worshipers. So I wonder, in reading these very different, although related texts, is there one that speaks to you or one that you have a strong reaction to?
I have a strong reaction to Maimonides. It reminds me of my mother saying to me, you can't get angry. It's not right to be angry. And I think that anger is healthy to a certain degree, as long as it's channeled in the right way. And for somebody who has been angry different parts of my life, I think that I have suppressed that anger. And I find that very, how can I put that? I find it very overwhelming at times. And the anger goes inward, and it isn't helpful. Whereas I think anger put into different channels and ways of thinking is much more helpful. That's just my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carl. I think I see a lot of nodding heads of agreement with that. Yeah, Tom.
Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. Just what stood out to me was, some of the Musar readings about, the absence, going too far the other way. It's easy, obviously we see people or ourselves who, get angry too quickly and to too great of an extent, right? We know that's easy to see the damage, but, what stuck out to me was, not expressing like he was just saying, but not expressing anger. Not only internally can it be hurtful and unhelpful, but it's almost to the point where you're enabling that activity. If you don't express that, you could be enabling that. The other thing that stuck out to me was some point in the readings that said most anger stems from a perceived breach of a relationship, which was kind of interesting. Right. It's probably true when you think about it deep down, what is so bothersome, what angers, and there's a breach of that trust or whatever that relationship is.
Yeah.
And the last thing, and then I'll shut up, is there's a contrast between, kind of what's in this Torah portion and kind of how God is perceived in the, and maybe Talmudic teachings and later teachings where, it's more about, kind of balancing that. And maybe we take a lesson, if you're looking at God in the Torah portion as more with human characteristics and we're modeling after that, obviously the teachings would be that, there's restraint. Anyway, but interesting stuff though.
Thank you so much, Tom, for all of those really thoughtful reflections. Is there anyone I'm missing who wanted to say something?
It's hard to look at this. It's hard for me because anger, something can happen to somebody where they're angry and they're just angry and they're angry and they're angry because what they plan to do in their life is no longer possible. Specifically, I'm remembering my father who lost an eye. He was in World War II, and so he could not become an aviator. That was impossible. And I think he was angry for a good part of the rest of his life, certainly until he joined AA. So anger, kind of like you're used to doing that, and then you can kind of get used to that. Anything, little small things trigger you. Unfortunately, it becomes something where you allow yourself to be upset quickly. One of the Maimonides quotes that he quoted was, "Whoever yields to anger, if he or she be a wise man or woman, has his or her wisdom, leave them." And I think that is particularly in intimate things, like within a family where you're around people and, oh, that triggered me last time. Oh, now it's triggering me this time. Oh, I always get angry for this, can get really ugly. Did in my family.
Yeah. Even the most thoughtful, sensitive people, when giving into anger, can lose all of that wisdom. There's a lot of truth in that.
Right. And there are a lot of triggers.
So I want us to kind of hold on to all of this as we kind of grapple with this idea of the positive and negative ramifications of anger and how we express it. And to go back to this text and exactly what Rabbi Catherine was teaching us all about a little bit earlier today, of focusing on these words, "Now let me be," right? And in Exodus Rabbah, this is a midrash, and it was quoted, this reference was given, actually, I don't know if it was quoted or if it was just referenced in the Musar Torah commentary this week, but this is the text that they were speaking of. So it says, "Now let me be." Was Moses holding fast to God that he should say, "Now let me be"? Of course not. Therefore, another meaning must be intended. To what can the thing be compared? To a king who was angry with his son and had brought into a chamber and was about to beat him. But then the king cried from the chamber, "Let me be that I might beat him." Now the instructor of the son was standing without, and he thought to himself, "If the king and the son were alone within the chamber, then to whom is he saying, 'Let me be'? It must be because the king wants me to go in and entreat him on his son's behalf. And for this reason, he says, 'Let me be.' He is hinting that I have the power or even the permission to prevent him if I so choose." Similarly, God had said to Moses, "Now let me be," and Moses inferred, "It is because God wants me to intercede on Israel's behalf." Thereupon Moses began to plead for mercy on their behalf, as it says, "But Moses implored the Eternal, his God." And we see something similar that Rabbi Mary Charno spoke about of this commentary, right? Said in supposedly telling Moses not to intervene, God is inviting Moses to intervene. If so, the phrase reveals God's own misgivings about the force of God's own rage. Before Moses so much as raises an eyebrow in objection, God suggests that there is a reason to object. Moses takes the opportunity and convinces God to relent. Had that not been the case, Ki Sa, this week's Torah portion, might have been an illustration of the teaching of Orchot Tzadikim. It is impossible for the angry one to escape great sin. And that Abraham, even Hasidi, anger begins with madness and ends with regret. It seems like God teeters just on the edge of both madness and regret. We could see this kind of reflected in here, right? And the final text that had been referenced is one from Deuteronomy, Rabbi, where God said to him, "Let not the two of us be angry, but when you see me pour hot water on you, you pour cold. And when you see me pour cold, you pour hot." Moses asked, "Ruler of the universe, how shall this happen?" And God replied, "Pray for mercy on their behalf." So what did he do? Immediately, but Moses implored the Eternal. So essentially what it's saying here is Moses and God are in this really special relationship with one another, that we all need people who can remind us of who our best selves are. Someone to whom we can say, now let me be, and that person is able to see through it and say, nope, I need to be here right now, and I need to remind you of what it is. You're allowing emotions to become the better of you. You're allowing your anger to forget all of the wisdom that you have within you. And I'm here to be your partner and to calm that down, to cool the hot water or to warm up the cold water, right? So any thoughts on this interpretation of this text? Do you buy it? Tom is shaking his head no. So do you want to say why?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to be gymnastics to get to, the point that is more in line with kind of our later teachings.
So you see it as apologetics?
For the most part.
Anyone else?
This is an yeah.
Jay and then Rabbi Catherine, go ahead.
I see this as a way of God testing Moses again, of seeing how far Moses will push God into giving his opinion. And I just see this as another one of those ways of God testing Moses. Just like God tests the Jewish people, God's also testing Moses as the leader to see how far he will go.
Thinking about what that's really interesting, what you just said. I'm thinking of how Moses was not around us, the Israelites, for what, 40 years when he showed up again? And so he is not fully acceptable as a leader. I mean, there is a teaching on either way of it. It's like maybe God is giving Moses another test to see if he steps up. It's like this. I don't know who Deuteronomy Rabbi is, but I don't think this is what it says in the Torah. So this is somebody interpreting how they see this.
This is Midrash. This is Midrash Rabbah on
Right.
Deuteronomy. So it's commentary based on the text.
Exactly. That's the fascination of studying Torah, actually, is there's so many opinions about everything.
And even in this group, and how wonderful that is, right?
Am I able to be heard now?
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead, Michael.
So I don't know if it was said before, but I have an issue with this last sentence here above Deuteronomy Rabbah. In the previous paragraph, it says that God teeters just on the edge of both mad and regret. So I have a juvenile concept of God. I don't know that.
Michael, we're losing you. I know you want to talk about this last line about God teetering.
All right. Can you hear me now?
No, we're having a lot of trouble hearing you again. Is it possible to go to Sandy? Like, are you in the same house?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Or maybe you can put it in the
we'd love to
chat.
hear you.
All right. So I can't be heard, can I?
Now you can.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Michael. Now we can't hear you again. I'm so sorry. I know it's really, really frustrating.
All right.
Maybe he could type it in the chat.
Yeah, that's what I was encouraging, but it sounds like he's going to Sandy so that he can say what he wants to say because her computer seems to be doing better. Sorry, Sandy. Yeah, go ahead, Shelley, in the meantime.
I'm thinking that when God says, let me be, it's kind of a jump, but he's saying to Moses, let the storyline drop. Don't do anything with it. I can hold the anger. The anger, I'm God, you're a guy, and I can hold this anger, but if you act on that, then it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be negative. But I think the idea is that we have these emotions. We have anger. We have all of these negative emotions. We can't suppress them or get rid of them, but we can drop the story around them, and we can put it back in God's lap. Let him have the anger. The anger is it's a pure emotion. It's okay. There's nothing unholy about the emotion in and of itself. I think when we try to fight it, and suppress it, or even act on it, in both ways, are taking the anger and giving it a story, acting it out. Whereas if we just let it be with God, just drop it there. So that's what I'm kind of thinking in terms of that. Let me be. Let me have that. That's for me. That's not for you to be acting on. But you can make meaning of it if you let it be for a while and sit with it.
What about?
Well, hold on, Carrie. Hold on one second, because I want to give Michael an opportunity to finish what he was in the middle of, and then I would love to give you an opportunity too.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I always had the thought of a God not taking on man's negative characteristic, but being sort of an ideal concept that man should try to emulate. So that's why I, in my own mind, just have a problem with God teeters just on the edge of both madness and regret. I mean, God, to me, and from what I've learned, is something we should try to copy, to emulate in our lives, not to have to be on the same level with the same problems that man has. It's perfection rather than lack of it. And so I don't know what the author of that, I just don't kind of agree or feel right with the author of that previous commentary. It's just, that's just the way I've been, and the way I perceive God to be, or in my life.
Yeah. So we all connect to God differently, right? And what you're speaking to is that many of us want to see and experience God as a kind of perfection. And that is definitely not what is displayed within this text, right? God is very imperfect in this text. And in fact, there are a number of texts within the Jewish tradition in which God displays God's self to be imperfect. And that can be a really hard thing to grapple with.
So for Reform Judaism or just
no. These are Jewish. I mean, remember, there are lots of different ways to understand every text.
Okay.
Everyone has different relationships with it. I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't believe about God. I'm just saying there is a tradition within Judaism of an imperfect God. And this is one of the ways in which that shows up within our tradition.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sorry. What did you want to say? Sorry.
Well, I think God is taking some human qualities here, right? We're not perfect. People are not perfect, and we're flawed. And I guess God is flawed. He's teaching us. Like you say, there's, no perfection there. Is he also teaching us about moderation and balance, and not taking, not going to one extreme or the other in term, all the passages with, trying to understand, what is said here. So not to take, not to go to one extreme or the other within the anger, and that we can get so much more done, accomplish when it's not that we're holding back anger, but maybe taking time also to reflect and think about it. We talked a lot about pausing, and it's okay to take time. So God needs time to kind of think about it. He may be, trying to tell Moses that he does want him to intervene, but by taking time, everybody can think about it, right? So maybe he's trying to teach us here that pausing, taking time, it's not that you want to suppress, but don't try to teach when you're angry, because you're going to shut down. People are not going to listen. The Israelites would not listen. And what would they learn if he just harms them? Does that, if he were to harm them, would they learn that he's, the God that they should be listening to? So there's just so much going on here. And I think that these passages have a lot of wisdom.
Absolutely. We can see ourselves so reflected in them, can't we? There's a Musar teaching. I can't remember who the rabbi was who said it, although it's referenced in Everyday Holiness by Alan Marinis, about how making a pause between the matchbox and the fuse, that we elongate that in some way, and that's actually the goal here, is not just to respond and be reactive, but to create that space in which to be reflective.
Right.
And we actually see that very much in the text that comes next. So a short while after this whole kind of conversation with Moses, there's this section in the Torah which says God came down in a cloud and stood with him there, proclaiming the name Adonai, Adonai, passed before him and proclaimed. And this is text that should be very familiar, or maybe very familiar, because we use it a lot, especially during the high holy days, right? Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. Sound familiar, right? These words are Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving inequity, transgression, and sin. And so essentially, God tells Moses that whenever God is becoming too wrapped up in God's emotions, whenever the people are in need of forgiveness, God should offer, or Moses should offer this name of God, or we as a Jewish people should offer these names of God in order to remind God of his more compassionate aspects of himself. Really fascinating, right? God needs us to pray to remind God of who God really is.
Wow. I mean, just think of it. So when we're saying, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, we are saying, God, this is who you are. Remember, this is who you are. And there's an incredible bits in this piece where you see I don't even know how to talk about it, a human side of God, and a request of God for Moses to pair with him, to remind him that he has more than this. The evolution of how God is presented in the Torah is incredible, especially this piece. We're saying, look, God, you're supposed to be doing this stuff. When we sing that or say that to God, I mean, to me, thinking like I'm standing there telling God what to do is like, it's hard to think about, but here it is. And here it is.
Exactly. Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Well, that just brings me to mind, kind of Buber and Heschel kind of, the takeaway was more on this is, man is supposed to, be God's hands on this earth. And there is that relationship, right? That we're supposed to be, working God's work here, right? And so, they tie into this, saying, we have a responsibility to carry these things and these works out, and that relationship, it's not just a one-way thing. And God depends on us, like Heschel's quote, about the Holocaust, you say, where was God? Well, he says, well, I would say, where was man? We have this responsibility, kind of stemming from this part.
Beautiful. Thank you. When we look at this text, right, and Rabbi Mary Chernow also points this out, the words that we start, it says, God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger. Those are the words that are specifically pointed out. And so Rabbi Chernow says it's critical to note that the text does not say never angry, but rather slow to anger. Anger in the right measure is actually a teacher. It can function like bright red flashing indicator light on our emotional dashboard, alerting us to a matter in need of attention. As a signal to our souls, anger can be holy. It can reveal a deep passion or perhaps a wound, a longing or a regret. It can help us clarify or prioritize. If God had said to the Israelites, I didn't even realize how important your loyalty was to me until so much anger rose up that I actually wanted to kill you. What are the parallels for us? Where can we notice anger and learn from it? On a societal level, too, anger can indicate that transformative change is necessary. Consider social movements such as Me Too, Black Lives Matter. The issues at their heart, sexual violence and racial inequality, have long been critical and worthy of our attention. However, they did not gain the national spotlight until anger fueled a sense of urgency. And I brought in just a few little pieces from a book called Good and Mad, written by Rebecca Tracer, maybe 2 years ago. This book came out, something like that, maybe a little more than that, somewhere in that vicinity. And really speaking to the importance of anger in certain circumstances. So she wrote, others are still experiencing injustice, still mad. Some of them are mad at you. Don't forget them. Don't write off their anger. Stay mad for them. Stay mad with them. They're right to be mad, and you're right to be mad alongside them. Being mad is correct. Being mad is American. Being mad can be joyful and productive and connective. Don't let them talk to you out of being mad again. And she wrote a little bit later, I confess that I'm now suspicious of nearly every attempt to code anger as unhealthy. No matter how well-meaning or persuasive the source, I believe Stanton was correct. What is bad for women, whether it comes to anger, are the messages that cause us to bottle it up, let it fester, keep it silent, feel shame and isolation for ever having felt it, or rechannel it in inappropriate directions. What is good for us is opening our mouths and letting it out, permitting ourselves to feel it and say it and think it and act on it and integrate it into our lives, just as we integrate joy and sadness and worry and optimism. And I think that speaks exactly to what you were saying earlier, Carl, where you were talking about some of that too, right? And then the final quote here, what becomes clear when we look to the past with an eye to the future is that the discouragement of women's anger via silencing, erasure, and repression stems from the correct understanding of those in power, that the fury of women lies the power to change the world. Anger can be a really positive force forward, depending on how we use it. Part of the reason that I felt it was important to put this text in is because I didn't include a lot of the texts from Musar that really say, in a lot of different ways, anger is bad, period, right? There are a lot of kind of black and white teachings that anger is negative. And I felt that it was really important to balance that with the productive ways in which anger exists and without shaming people for feeling anger. Because the truth is, you know, like Shelley, like you were talking about, we all feel anger, and to repress that ultimately is going to come back and hurt us. But how do we channel it in a way that it actually is helpful? So I included a couple of texts, or a couple of questions here around this. Do you agree that anger can sometimes be holy? If so, how do we make sense of some of the Musar teachings around overcoming our anger? And if not, how might we respond to injustices in our world if anger isn't appropriate? So any thoughts on any of that? Yeah, go ahead. I see a hand.
Oh, I think that was mine.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just saying that, yeah, in as far as the holiness aspect of it, I think in the social justice arena, like you were saying, or when you see injustice or somebody being unfairly or injustice being exacted, I think there is, anger is also an emotion, right? And how you act on it, is, I think, key in this, right? So, you're saying you feel that, and then you have this reflection or the matchstick or the, how do you actually actualize that? And I think maybe that's where the holiness part, could come in.
Beautifully said. Am I missing anyone? Yeah, go ahead, please.
There are a number of things that we just read that indicate that the difference is between recognizing that you're angry and where you go from there. It's like, why am I angry? Why am I being triggered? Is this just, is this something that I should address? And am I afraid of addressing it? Because anger can keep you from doing it because, I'm so angry. I'm just seeing red all over. But to say, what is happening? I mean, that's where you get the holiness part of anger. That's where you get the Black Lives Matter and all of those movements are, we're really angry and now we're going to get organized and now we're going to do something about that anger. So that anger comes forth with a lot of force. You're not just like, well, baby, and how do you do that forcefully and effectively, knowing that you could be attacked for it?
And also that you can allow your anger to blaze forth in a way that isn't productive, right? Like sometimes we can, for righteous causes and for good reason, we're angry, but we allow ourselves to be so angry that we stop listening to anyone and we close down and we shut off and we're actually hurting ourselves and those around us. So that fine line, figuring out how to respond. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fine line between fight or flight too. Sometimes flight is the way to go if you would like to preserve your life.
I'm noticing that Michael Sherman wrote something in the chat as well that I want to just kind of bring up here. Humanizing God is, I guess, bringing God down to the human level, a concept of anthropomorphism. This is what I have a problem accepting in my mind. Again, man is imperfect and God is not. And right, how do we wrestle with this text if we believe in a perfect God and the text isn't demonstrating God in quite that way? Perhaps also God is in the eye of the beholder, right? We might see things in God that we see in ourselves. So there's so many different ways to kind of understand this and grapple with it. But Michael, you are not alone in this, right? I think a lot of us struggle with the idea of an imperfect God because we want God to be perfect. We want it to be aspirational so that we can have something to look up to and to hope that we can move closer to achieving. I'm looking at the time and it's 1:56. I have two different texts here. I'm only going to bring in one of them. I think I'm going to bring in this first one actually as a way to kind of close it down, though I love the second one too. Rabbi Pesach Krohn wrote this story that in a yeshiva in Novordak, there were no dormitory facilities for the students. Instead, they're responsible for finding their own accommodations, and most rented rooms nearby from owners who were happy to have them as tenants. There was one exception. One building where more than 20 rooms were occupied by students was owned by a bitter woman who was a widow. She ridiculed and criticized every one of the students who rented from her. Her anger even led her to sometimes turn off water and electricity on Friday afternoons. Soon her harassment became too much to tolerate, and the students moved out one by one. Only one student remained, Yosef Geffen. One morning, as he was coming home from shul, the woman yelled at him, "You must be crazy. How can you still stay in my building? You see that all the other boys have moved out. Why do you insist on staying?" Yosef paused for a moment and then said softly to the woman, I stay here for your sake. I realize that you live alone, and I fear one night you might fall or become ill and call out for help, and there will be no one to hear your cries. I understand that when you yell at us, you are merely letting out your frustrations and anger about being widowed and struggling. I therefore felt it was proper for me to stay just in case you might ever need help. The woman's face changed. This was not at all what she had expected to hear. She was so surprised by the unexpected concern that she literally pleaded with the student, forgive me, young man. It never dawned on me. That was the reason that you were staying. How kind and gracious of you. For days afterwards, she never said anything but kind words to the students she met. Slowly, word got around that she was no longer as bitter and angry as she had been, and the students started moving back into the building until all the rooms were filled. And part of the reason I brought in this story is because it speaks to kind of the fear that sometimes leads to anger. That when we feel anger, right, there's very often something underneath it that is being expressed. And in this student's concern, he addressed the source of that anger, and there was finally an opportunity for transformation. And so what if when we felt anger in ourselves, or when we were confronted by anger in other people, we looked at human beings and said, okay, there's something going on here, and there is a need that isn't being met. There is some pain here that's going on. I was always taught that when people act in ways that make them most unlovable is when they need love the most. Mm-hmm. And perhaps if we can remember that, then that will help us all to be better people and to be able to channel, our emotions for good. So I just want to thank you all for such beautiful comments and reflections, or just simply your presence here. We all come at Torah study with our own different wisdom and experience, and we're better for having the teachings and the presence of all of you. So thank you so very much. And next week, we will be able to have a multi-access Torah study. The only reason it wasn't multi-access today wasn't because of COVID. It was because my computer that I need in order to do it multi-access stopped working. And so it is fixed and on its way back to me. And next week we're able to do it and all will be well. So I look forward to seeing you, whether you choose to be online or you choose to be in person, just being able to study with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
You too.
Rabbi.